Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Leveraging the Secret Sauce of Relationships to Improve Reentry Outcomes. This webinar is focused on the value of social capital. I'm Anita Brown Graham. I'm your webinar host for this afternoon. I'm joined by my colleague, Maureen Berner, who will serve as the chat box moderator, Barbara Steele, who will serve as the event manager, and of course, you've already met the wonderful Shane, who makes all of this happen. I'm just delighted to be with you this afternoon. And I love that these webinar numbers just keep getting higher and higher each time, which tells me that you must be telling everyone you know to join us. And if that's not true, then be sure that you make it true for the next webinar. Let's start by just going over the agenda, if we might. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just introducing those who are new to our webinar series to this concept of social capital and two particular practices that we want to focus on today. The first is meaningful engagement, emphasis on the word meaningful, for participants through strategic thought around the time or intensity that it takes to build these relationships. And then the second practice is focused on how organizations build and leverage their social capital on behalf of their program participants. We are delighted to have presentations from ROCA Inc. and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention at the U.S. Department of Justice. As we have done in the other two webinars, we will have a question and answer session with the speakers. So I encourage you to start putting your questions in the chat box as soon as you got them. And then we'll spend some time digging into the practices with you, recognizing that you all have a lot of wisdom to share around these practices, and we want to be sure that you have an opportunity for some peer learning. And then finally, I will have some information for you in closing. Next slide, please. So just remember, as we've said before, RTI International and the NC Impact Initiative at the UNC School of Government have been working with the Assistant Secretary of Planning and Evaluation in the U.S. Department of Health to better understand how social capital strategies, that is, those strategies to build and leverage our relationships, can help to improve outcomes in human service programs, including those programs that focus on people returning to their communities after incarceration. This is the third in a series of 4 webinars that looks at 8 emerging practices that our work together suggests are really important for building social capital. In webinar 1, we looked at how important it is to look at data around how you are building social capital. And then we looked at this practice of engaging individuals with similar experiences in your staffing in order to support program participants. In webinar 2, we discussed the importance of developing organic connections, so creating spaces where relationships build and flourish, thinking about peer groups and using those strategically in your programs. And then finally, the importance of accountability on both sides. Program participants have accountability to the program has accountability to program participants. Today, we're going to focus on fostering organizational, participant, and mentoring relationships. And then 2 weeks from now, on September 15th at the same time, we'll present the 4th and final webinar in our series, which will take a broad look at incorporating relationship building practices in your organization. We'll examine the final practice of using technology to build social capital. And then we want to spend some time talking about a number of core principles or values that we believe are essential for organizations that are seeking to successfully use any of the 8 practices. Please remember, you'll receive certificates of completion for each training you attend and copies of the slides the Monday following the webinar. And if you haven't done so already, we invite you everyone here today to register for the complete series of 4 Value of Social Capital webinars. Maureen, I hope you'll put the registration link in the chat box so there'll be no reason for people not to be registered for September 15th. Next slide. So let me just do a brief overview of social capital for those who are joining us for the first time and might be asking, so what is this social capital thing anyway? It's pretty simple. It sounds much more complicated than it is. We really are focusing here on connections, relationships, networks among people, and the tangible value that comes from them. So not every connection you have with someone offers you a tangible value, but those that do, we want to make sure we mine them in a strategic way to support program outcomes. Now you may be asking, well, what do you mean by value, Anita? Well, it could be information, somebody who tells you about a job, an opportunity. It could be emotional or financial support. It could be the person who opens a door to employment or other resources. But for it to be social capital, you have to be able to point to this benefit, this value that comes from the relationship. And of course, our focus here is on positive social capital, but it's probably important for me to say again and again, some social capital can be negative. Indeed, many of the populations we are working with are in the position they're in because of relationships and networks that resulted in negative outcomes. Next slide, please. So let's look at the 2 practices of building these relationships that offer value. When we talk about meaningful engagement for participants through time or intensity, we're really focusing on the fact that social capital involves creating trusting connections that have reciprocity. What does that mean? It means that among program participants or between program participants and staff or members of the community, the relationships are built on a sense of trust. Fundamentally, I think you're in it for me and I am in it for you, and reciprocity, which means I'll do for you and I know you will do for me in return. Helping participants to build these kinds of relationships in a meaningful way doesn't just happen. It takes strategy that often involves thoughtfulness about the time and the intensity of interactions that it will take to build these kinds of relationships. Our second practice, building and leveraging organizational social capital, asks us to think about how organizations that have social capital themselves, as programs, you have capital that is embedded in your positive reputation, is embedded in your relationship with other programs, with other services. How do you use those? How do you build them? How do you leverage them in ways that actually improve your program's ability to focus on participants' individual social capital? So in this webinar, we'll not just talk about how organizations build social capital, but we'll try to focus on how you use that to increase the social capital of your program participants. Now, we'll come back to these 2 practices again and again. You'll hear from them in ROCA. You'll hear a bit about them in the mentoring presentation from OJJDP. But what I'd like to do now, before we turn to our speakers, because it's helpful for them to know where you are as they give their presentations, is get a sense of how many of you would say you're already using these practices. So let's go to our poll, if we might. The first question, how many of your programs would you say are engaged in meaningful engagement for participants thinking through time or intensity. And then the second question is how many of your programs are intentionally engaged in building and leveraging organizational social capital in order to support your program participants? Give you a couple more seconds if you haven't voted yet. Terrific. So the vast majority of you would say you are meaningfully engaging your participants through a thoughtful strategy of how much time or intensity it takes to develop these relationships, right? 85% of people on this call. On the other hand, with respect to building and leveraging your organizational social capital to support the social capital development for your program participants, we've got 66% of you who say that's an intentional part of your organizational strategy. Well, I guarantee you that by the time you get through with this webinar, 100% of you will be saying, we need to be working on this, and we think we've got some great ideas about how to implement this practice in our programs. So let me then move to the primary reason why I'm so confident you're going to be all over this at the end of this hour. First, I am delighted to introduce on this webinar representatives of ROCA Inc., yet another impressive organization that is using social capital capacity building successfully. Most of ROCA's programs serve young men, predominantly ages 17 to 24, who are traumatized and isolated and at high risk for long-term incarceration and long-lasting disconnection from employment and education. There are 2 ROCA sites that also serve high-risk young mothers, usually ages 16 to 24, and their children, by providing childcare, early education, development, and social assessments for children, 2 years of intensive programming for mothers in education, vocational training, transitional employment, job placement, life skills, and parenting. I think you can already see why this concept of social capital is so important to the successful outcomes of this program. For more information on ROCA, you can see the case study, which we did as part of this project. And Maureen, if you haven't already done so, can you just put the link for the case study up in the chat box? Let me introduce you to the representatives of ROCA. First, I'm excited to introduce Anisha Chablani Medley, who started her career at ROCA as a youth worker in 2000 and began running programming in 2002. Today, as Chief Programming Officer, Anisha oversees ROCA's staff training functions, and she's responsible for creating and implementing ROCA's performance-based management system. Next, we'll hear from Ronald Mitchell, who has been working at the organization for over 7 years. In his work at ROCA, Ron has grown and advanced into various positions, and he is currently the Safety and Crisis Coordinator. Ron is with us today, particularly because he is known for having a tremendous capacity to build relationships with young people and partners, and he has had the opportunity to support numerous young people through their change processes. Roca says of Ron, he's not only a caring, solid role model, he's an example that change is possible. Last and not least, from Roca, we have Damian Johnson, who's currently a youth worker for the organization. Damian's work is particularly important to him because as a former participant at Roker, he understands better than just about anyone the struggle of the young people he now serves. For Damian, being able to intervene in the lives of Roker participants is extremely fulfilling as he's able to give back and help guide other young people to a healthier, more stable place. After you've heard from the Roker representatives, we're then thrilled that you'll have a chance to hear from Carrie Strug, who's a program manager with the Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Carrie is here to talk to us today about the agency's support for mentorship programming in particular. And as you all know, mentorship is an important strategy for building meaningful relationships. Again, let me remind you, if you've got questions for these speakers, go ahead and put them in the chat box as they come in, and Maureen will ask the questions of the speakers at the end of their presentations. With that, I'm excited to turn things over to Anisha. Anisha, as I understand it, you're going to start and then give it to Ron, and then you'll come back, talk a little bit about the second practice, and then turn things to Damian, and then Carrie will take it away. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Terrific. Let's go.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks so much for having us today. We're really excited to join you and share a little bit about our practices. So as you can see, our kind of mission is up there on the screen. We are deeply committed to helping disrupt the cycles of incarceration and poverty for young people who are at the heart of some of the hardest and most intense violence, who are coming out of houses of corrections and reentering, and who are most deeply affected by some of the systemic racism and systemic challenges that that we see on a daily basis. So our strategies for doing this are really to engage very intensely with young people and the adults at the center of violence, and these systems in very deep relationships and intense relationships to address the trauma and hope and drive change. We do this with young people in a number of ways. Outreach is the core strategy, and then what we call building transformational relationships. It's our case management model, where we have youth workers who have lots of roles and functions, and play a key role. Ron's going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like and how we engage young people through the outreach and transformational relationships. We also use those relationships to engage young people in skill building that really is focused on helping people learn to feel comfortable and safe enough to be able to learn the skills that help them be able to make choices, and learn the skills that will help them advance and make progress, and ideally and hopefully move toward those outcomes that we most strive toward. And so those are really key strategies. The critical part about this is being able to use all of this and creating a place where people can practice and kind of fail and repeat and do this over again. So we do what we call stage-based programming and create spaces where people can practice. In this time of remote programming, we have been pushed to figure out ways to engage young people in skill building and practice the skill building that has really, I think, made our practices and engagement even more meaningful, which is awesome. And our final strategy is really around this engaged institutions work, which is essentially street work with adults, but it's this deep relationship building with adults who are in these systems. and how we work with them, again, to build relationships and to get them engaged with us, to understand some of what we know to be true about young people and how they develop, the brain development, how trauma affects the brain, what strategies work in these situations, what doesn't work, and how to come up with policies and practices that actually can benefit young people and then move forward. So Ron's going to talk a little bit more about the outreach in TRs.
Hello, everyone. As we know, we've heard here today already many times about the importance of relationships, and relationships are, everything with our young people that we serve. In building it, there's a strategy, there's a way in which what we do in order to build that, because we are trying to build trust with them, and we want them to know that they can be safe with us. So what we do is we have a relentless outreach. Because we have, our youth are not ready, willing, and able. They just don't, before COVID, they just don't want to walk into the door and receive the services in which we have and all the programming that we have. So what we do is we go out to them. We meet them where they're at. So, myself, youth workers, we go out to where they are. So we have guys that are, street involved. So we go in those areas in which where they are, and we meet them. When they don't want to engage with us, we continually go after them. So our relentless outreach, is based on a minimum of 2 to 3 contacts where we reach out a week to them. So it's not like, so they can see that we are really invested in their future, invested in them, because most of our youth, they've heard people say that they want to help them or they'll be there for them. And when they do reach out to them or when they call for them, they're not there. So one of the things in which we do a relentless outreach in which where we continually go to them and we go out and seek them, and we work at strategies in which so they can have a better future and make better decisions. Also, we are a 4-year program, so 2 years, the first 2 years is very intense. We build a relationship to whereas we can have those hard conversations with them. And that is to move them so that their decision making can be much better in their choices and all that, and they can get better outcomes in their own lives. And the second 2 years is like a follow-up. We say, it's a 4-year program, but really it extends further than that, because once the relationship is built, it's impossible to just cut someone off when they come to you and ask you for help. So those are the things in which we do. And we're always, we go the extra mile. So when there's things happen out in the streets and things like that, we get on the phone, we go on Facebook, we reach out to them. Since COVID happened, we had to come up with, like Anisha said, we had to come up with new strategies and ways of reaching them. So most of our youth are engaged in Facebook. So that's what we do. We reach out to them by way of internet and things like that. And we give them the doses of programming and things that are needed, because these are crucial times right now, because if we don't give them something to do, they're going to go and look for something to do. So it's important now that we had to come up with ways in which to reach them where they were, and we still go out and we make our contacts with them. Yes, we do all COVID safe practices. We wear masks. We make sure and teach those same values to them. So so that way right there, that they don't feel as though they're left out to dry. So those are the things in which we do. And if I missed anything, Anisha, if you
nope, that was great. So the Anita, just what you were saying is the relationship also has to have meaningful value, right? And so this is where we use a relationship to actually attach to programming and skill building. We also really train youth workers in all the kind of core skill building strategies that we want to help young people learn. So we've developed a mobile CBT curriculum that youth workers are trained in, and they're doing CBT in real-time practice with young people wherever they are. We've developed a workforce readiness curriculum that youth workers are trained in, where they can do coaching with young people wherever they are. And so the idea is that every contact needs to be meaningful. Like, we're not building relationships just to have them, we're building relationships to be transformational, so that we can help young people learn skills they need, and every contact has value, because we don't know when we'll see them again, to be honest, right? And so we don't have time to spare. And when it comes to our engaged institution partners, right, the other people who show up when it's the hardest on the street, when violence happens, are often the adults who are in these systems. And so it's critical that we help them understand too the impact of trauma on young people, the kind of practices that help everyone slow down and not be reactive, to be able to learn what works, to actually make progress. And so we're really committed to working with our institutional partners to learn these strategies and to change practices and policy that actually benefits our young people, so that they understand change isn't going to happen overnight, that they understand, it's a process, that they understand how to regulate themselves so they can engage differently, so that probation conditions are set up in a way that makes sense for young people who have experienced extensive trauma, that, we design programming in ways that make sense. And it only matters if it makes sense for the participants we serve. So Damien, who we are very fortunate to have, is in a dual position, because he is a youth worker, but he was a participant, and now he gets to play that role for other young people. So I'm going to let Damien talk about his experience as a participant and also as a youth worker. Damien, it's all you.
Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. I wish I would have prepared a little bit better. I had a nice little speech for you guys. But so as a YP here at Roca, the main thing was indeed the relationships with the individuals, like my youth worker, the crew supervisors. Ron actually used to be my crew supervisor. Feels like a century ago, but wasn't actually that long ago. But yeah, it's very important to establish these relationships early on, because when you enter a program like this, all of us, we have, our defenses are up. We're like, who are these strangers who are telling me how to live my life? Who are these people trying to, show me how to do this, so on and so forth. So our shields are up. And the only way we can really break those shields down is if you start to establish a real relationship, because you can have a professional relationship with somebody, but with the individuals we're working with, that's just not going to cut it. So yeah, my experience as a YP here was basically establishing hard relationships that are still kept to this date. And now I'm co-workers with them. So that's fantastic. Coming in as a youth worker, it's definitely a little tricky. There's a lot of things happening behind the scenes that nobody's aware of. But I also played both roles. I was also a crew supervisor last year, so I was already pretty much familiar with a good portion of the YPs that we're serving. So relationships were semi-built, but it's a big difference between the relationship as a youth worker and the relationship as a crew supervisor. As a crew supervisor, I have to be stern. I have to make sure these guys are aware that, when you're leaving Roca, we don't want to receive a phone call from, your boss saying, hey, this guy was playing on his cell phone, or hey, this guy decided to smoke a joint in the bathroom for whatever reason. So my job as crew supervisor was to be that person that, they didn't really want to hear it from me. I was the guy, okay, you're getting a write-up for doing this. You did this incorrectly. Let's work on this. I know a better technique to get this done. So as a youth worker, I'm able to kind of like flip that switch in a sense, and actually sit down and like truly start to establish, what this specific person wants and how I can approach them. There's different routes that you can take to kind of sneak in under their shield before you're able to break it down and kind of gauge, is this person really upset about this specific situation, or is this something that I was just told down the grapevine? So once you're able to, establish, hey, you and I might have some things in common, and we're all human beings, and people start to break down these barriers. Like the photo that's up here, the YP that I'm speaking to, actually, this man wanted nothing to do with me for a long time, wanted nothing to do with me, wouldn't answer my phone calls, nothing. Now, like he's on TP every day. He's doing great. We actually got his girlfriend involved, so there's more brownie points for us all. But it's a whole team-oriented thing when you're trying to establish relationships, because before he worked with me, he might have been working with 3 other people. Who knows what they were doing with him. So it really is a team effort for all of us to participate, to establish great relationships with the YPs, because like Anisha said, this goes on and on throughout their lives. They age out of Roca. We hope that we see these guys coming in and saying, hey, I am doing great. By the way, I might have somebody who might be interested in the program. So we want to keep those doors going. So I guess that's it from me, guys.
Thank you so much. And of course, we've got a slide here with contact information for our just amazing presenters from Roca. As someone said, sounds like an awesome program. Indeed, it does. Carrie, I'll turn things over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Anita. And yeah, kudos to you all. I am somewhat familiar with your program, but it was great to hear from you. And we really appreciate all you're doing, particularly at this difficult time. So I am here to talk about mentoring programs from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. First, I'm going to start off with the vision of our office at OJDP is we envision a nation where youth are free from crime and violence. And if they come into the contact with the juvenile justice system, we want the contact to be both just and beneficial to them. Our mission is to provide national leadership, coordination, and resources to prevent and respond to juvenile delinquency and victimization. We support states, tribes, and communities to develop and implement effective and equitable juvenile justice systems. We hope that these organizations can enhance public safety and ensure that youth are held accountable both to crime victims and their communities. And then, of course, we want to empower youth. That seems like what today's topic is more about, to live productive, law-abiding lives, and sometimes that's through relationships. So youth mentoring, how do we define that? We define it as a consistent pro-social relationship between an adult or an older peer and one or more youth, and this can help support the positive youth development. Mentoring has been shown through numerous studies over the years that it improves self-esteem, academic achievement, relationships, and that it negates drug use, certain depressive symptoms, and delinquent acts. Next slide, please. Thank you. So OGJDP, what is our approach? We have direct service, and we have had in the past some funded research programs, and then we also have training and technical assistance for youth mentoring. Our research has moved to the National Institute of Justice, but past examples are stated here: our enhancement demonstration program, our practitioner research partnership mentoring children of incarcerated parents demonstration program, and then also our practitioner research partnership in cognitive behavioral mentoring program. So our largest solicitation is called the Mentoring Opportunities for Youth Initiative. It was initially released in 2015. Prior to that, we had separate solicitations. We decided to put them all together. And at that time, there was 3 different categories. There was our national mentoring category. You have to be in 45 states or more. Our multi-state, which you are in 5 to 45 states. And then our category 3 was a collaborative mentoring program. In 2018, we got additional funding in terms of youth impacted by opioids. So we added category 4 and 5. And 4 is those youth impacted by opioids directly at project sites. So more local organizations can apply, whereas in category 5, it's our statewide and regional mentoring initiative. As you can see here, we do give a lot of money to direct services. And I believe we are currently the largest federal funder for mentoring programs. This is just another slide showing the amount of funding we have. For FY 2020, our new fiscal year is October 1, and so we'll announce how many programs and how much funding coming up in a few weeks. So in addition to those direct service funds, we have training and technical assistance, and our main site for this is the National Mentoring Resource Center. And the goal of this is to improve the quality and the effectiveness of mentoring programs across the country. And this is through increased use of evidence-based practices, as well as sharing practitioner innovations. So the Mentoring Resource Center, there's like 3 main areas. It's our National Mentoring Resource Center website. And as you'll see here, and I'll go through in more detail in the following slides, we have a blog. If you receive funding from OJJDP, there's a dedicated part of the site there where you can see webinars and various other information. We have numerous research vetted resources and various evidence reviews. There's the second part, which is this research board. And then the third part is training and technical assistance. So the elements of effective practice for mentoring are very, very important to us at OJGDP with our mentoring programs. And you will see it throughout the National Mentoring Resource Center site. All of the TA that's provided is based on the elements of effective practice. So you'll, again, see it repetitively. It represents the research and practitioner-informed recommended practices for implementing a quality youth mentoring program. And if you want to go on the site, if you don't have access to this or you haven't seen it before, I highly recommend you download it for free. And this is great to begin a program or to really, check in if you've had one that's been progressing for years, but maybe you need to fine tune some areas to, check it out and get assistance with these particular 6 elements. Next slide. Okay, and so here is a slide focusing on the website. It's just full of mentoring research to practice materials. There's a comprehensive and reliable resource for training and technical assistance. At the local program level, we provide mentoring tools and resources and reviews of mentoring research and best practices. There's an e-newsletter if you want to sign up for that. So I encourage all of you at the end of this PowerPoint, you will see the link, or you can just Google the National Mentoring Resource Center if you're interested in viewing a plethora of information that we provide. We do have a blog on the site. This is relatively new, one of the newer features, and it's one strategy in providing practitioners with more access to relevant insights, opinions, and fresh information that can strengthen any program and build a true community of mentoring professionals nationally. Again, this is what our site entails. We feel that it's extremely comprehensive. You can see here, this is more for those grantees, the new grantee orientation. For those organizations that receive funding from us, there's a dedicated part to that site. So the NMRC Research Board is devoted to bringing research-informed information to the entire mentoring movement. It's led by David Dubois from the University of Illinois, Chicago. And there's also 32 other research board members with a wide range of expertise, backgrounds, and experience. So our training and technical assistance, this is a big part of the site. You do not have to be a grantee. You do not have to receive federal funds from us to request no-cost technical assistance. We are hopeful that all the programs out there improve the quality and effectiveness of their programs. We want to make sure that You have a comprehensive mentoring resource and various training materials. And of course, it's important to us that programs implement evidence and research-based practices. So again, here, these are the different things that you can gain from accessing our training and technical assistance. If you need assistance in any of those elements of effective practice areas, those 6 core elements, you can request assistance right here. It's very easy. This big red link is how you can go to our website and request help with your program. Again, it's free. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the National Mentoring Summit. If you're working with youth, this is an amazing conference that happens every year during Mentoring Month at the end of January in Washington, D.C. And you can see here it's January 27th to 29th. I'm not sure how this is going to work because usually there's over 1,300 participants and all these different workshops. I mean, it's pretty amazing for those that are, again, new to mentoring or those that are extremely experienced. And then here are some resources for all of you to check out after this presentation if you're interested in either enhancing or creating a mentoring program. And lastly, if you aren't familiar with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or even if you are, we always encourage everyone to connect with us through social media. I feel like we are constantly updating and providing news and information regarding the youth that we serve across the nation.
So terrific, Carrie. Thank you so much. Let's turn to Maureen. I've been watching the chat box, so I know we've got some questions already queued up. And if you've got other questions, please go ahead and get them in the chat box. Maureen, what do you have?
Well, Anisha, we have, I think, an important question that also relates to some of the resources that Carrie referred to in terms of understanding, measuring outcomes. So one of the questions that I think would be relevant for everybody on the call is, how do you measure for an effective outreach strategy? How do you know if you've been successful? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yep. So one of the key things for us is actually retention in the program, and knowing that we're engaging everyone and keeping them engaged. So we actually look at retention numbers and look at every single dismissal and why people are dismissed, which might not sound like a big deal, but for a population that doesn't often want to be engaged, like this isn't a mandated population, nor does it's voluntary in the sense that, you know, people aren't mandated, but it's not, people aren't showing up because they're ready for change. And so that's one key thing that we're really is really critical, because a lot of programs too, they don't actually track people who aren't enrolled, right? Or who drop out. So we look at every person who comes in and you know, how long we've retained them and every reason why people are dismissed. We track a lot of data actually. So we track every contact. We track youth workers enter every contact and every effort they make to contact. So as Ron was saying, it's 2 to 3 contacts that we are trying to make a week. It might take 8 or 9 attempts to get an actual contact. And so those are tracks. We can look at trends and what it actually takes to engage someone in relationship and build relationships. And because we also stay with people through relapse periods, or when people essentially tell us to go away and not come back, how long it takes to get them back. And so there's a lot of sort of that kind of tracking.
Actually, let me turn just briefly to Damien and Ronald as the frontline folks in terms of, how do you view success? How do you know when you've been successful in developing that relationship when it's actually happening?
I'll go briefly on it, and then I'll also let Damien share what he considers. Success for me is not, it's not the big grand, all of a sudden they've got it all. Success could be just they come in and you know, and they start doing their high set. They're working on their high set. They come in and they show up for work for a week. Those are successes for a lot of our young people because they don't stick with everything long and they don't believe that those things are successes. So it's important for us to bring out to them that those things are successes for them so that they can continue to get to those greater things that other people may look for, like the grand, like, you know, they finally got it and then they're on their own doing things. You know, we look at the smaller things because those are successes, you know, showing up and then, you know, just sticking with it, even if it's sticking with it for a week, like I said, you know, you got to stay in with people. You got to stay in with the young. So that's what it is for me.
So my version of success for the YPs is pretty much similar to Ron's, slightly different in the sense that, you know, this is a stage-based program, so our success is graduation, employment, contact standards, so on. But success for me is when I have a YP that is just, you know, I'm good, you know, my girl this, my girl that. When that YP calls me up and says, hey, I went and I took my GED test today. Hey, I'm no longer in the streets. I don't want to hustle no more. Hey, can you show me how to balance a checkbook? Or hey, can you help me beef up my resume? That's my form of success when the YP is looking for me to get these things done.
That's great. Anita, how are we in terms of time? I have one more question in the chat box. Can we?
Yes, you can ask one more question, absolutely.
And so I might circle back to Anisha on this to ask about the trainings that you provide, especially around trauma, the own trainings that you do with your own staff, is my understanding of the question that came up. Could you talk to us a little bit about what those are like?
Yep. So we do a lot of work. It's actually, we believe in much more of a coaching model and an ongoing kind of coaching model. We do a lot of support and work with a lot of experts in the field, MGH and McLean, and to really keep up on the current data and research around trauma and the impacts of trauma. And then we kind of get in with our teams, we bring people in, but we also do a very kind of a training that really relates to how this trauma impacts our young people, what it looks like. And we do coaching on a regular basis. So like monthly coaching sessions and what it means that to understand the trauma and the impact, and then how we then approach our work knowing that, right? So it's one thing to just be trauma informed, but then what it means to actually do the work, and how we have to deliver and adjust and build programming and make things work for a population that has significant trauma. And so it's an ongoing thing. Staff are teams are trained at least and coached monthly so that we can keep refreshing ourselves, because in the day-to-day we can lose the focus and purpose. And then everyone gets supervision individually weekly. So we're really committed to kind of developing and supporting our staff to be able to use the information, right? So that we can be effective with the strategies.
Terrific. Maureen, I see one more question, and I think this one's for Sherry. Fiani, tell me if I got this wrong. But the question is, do these resources apply to the TAY, transitional age youth populations, ages 18 to 24? Carrie?
So, our large mentoring solicitation that I referred to, our mentoring, opportunities for youth, you need to start services at 17 years old or younger, just because we are the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. There are other funding opportunities out there for older youth. But for the solicitation I was speaking of, yes, services have to start. And we have 36 months awards. So, if they start, we obviously want that relationship to continue. But the funding is primarily for those under 18 years of age.
Terrific. Thank you. All right. So let's just spend a couple of minutes digging further into these practices with you all. One of the things that's really important to us is to be explicit that there's not just one way to deliver on these practices. And so in addition to the great work of Roka, we want to lift up for the practice of meaningful engagement, the work of UTEC, which is an organization that serves justice-involved youth through street outreach and correctional facility in-reach that continues providing intensive supports once a young person is released. UTEC has transitional coaches who provide one-on-one support to youth in the form of mentorship and wraparound service coordination for the entire period of the youth enrollment, which typically averages between 18 and 24 months. UTEC credits its program's success to its long-term commitment to participants and the intense engagement that it provides at the beginning of the program. So what are some questions to ask yourself as you are thinking through your own program? Well, the first one is about how long does the relationship need to last in order to really develop a meaningful relationship? The second is really around the frequency of your meetings. So how often do we think participants need to meet in order to build that trusting relationship that Ron and Damien spoke so powerfully about? And then it's great to hear Roka say, it's hard to let people go once you develop a relationship with them. So one of the questions to ask yourself about your own program is, should you be intentionally encouraging relationships to continue informally after participants leave the program? So I got a chat box question for you all, because I want to be sure that we're not selling these practices as though we live in Disneyland. This is hard work, and there are challenges, significant challenges, engaged in implementing these practices. So when you think about this practice of building meaningful relationship, just give us some thoughts in the chat box about what some of the challenges are to making that happen. As you're doing that, I'm going to move on and talk about the second practice, which is building and leveraging organizational capital. And here, the second program we want to highlight is Heart Smiles, which is not technically a reentry program. It serves youth in Baltimore City, some of whom have been justice involved, and it uses its partnership with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health to connect youth. And let me just tell you, Johns Hopkins School of Public Health is a big deal, right? So this is social capital on steroids. They're connecting youth to professionals at the school through participation in conferences and the Johns Hopkins Youth Advisory Board. In the era of COVID, as we've heard from Roka, you got to think differently about how you keep these connections going. And so this program has moved its live YouTube sessions during the pandemic stay-at-home orders. In addition, the program uses its partnerships with Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program to help connect youth to jobs, long-term career options, and higher education opportunities, including trade schools, certifications, and college. Again, this is not Disney World. This is hard work. So some questions to ask yourself as you dig into this practice is, what exactly are the relationships that your organization can use to further your participants' goals? What sorts of networks can you build that will actually help individual participants achieve what it is they've come to your program to achieve? For example, if your participants want or need access to employment or childcare, are there ways for you to consider leveraging your organization's networks to provide job referrals or connections to employers or connections to childcare organizations? Second consideration, really about your organizational influence and channels. You all have influence and channels. Don't fool yourself, you've got them. So where do you have them, and how do you leverage them? How are you leveraging them to support your participants? Third, the formal and the informal connections. So where do you have organizational influence that you could do a better job of leveraging to support program connections? Consider, what are the opportunities for putting in place a memorandum of understanding with other agencies, or maybe just more informal ad hoc collaborations that you develop as needed? And then finally, this idea of connection from all program stakeholders. So there's some programs we studied that intentionally tap into the large and diverse stakeholder networks of as many agencies as possible, including who is your staff connected to, your volunteers, your board members, congregations, others. Each of these individual stakeholder networks may have access to other networks and resources that participants could benefit from accessing. So here the question is really for you to think about, how do you map these networks in order to really maximize the connections for your program participants? Lots of big questions. Chat box question for you. What do you see as the challenges to actually building organizational social capital as a way to help individual participants? While you're teaching each other in the chat box, I'm going to move on to the next slide because I'm going to get you out of here at 3 o'clock as promised. So you've got one more bite at the apple. We've got a final webinar coming up on the 15th. I'm going to ask Maureen to put in the chat box the link to our survey. We want to do these webinars in ways that help you wake up tomorrow morning and think differently, creatively, with more energy about how you build and leverage social capital in your programs. So please do not hesitate to tell us how we can improve. Next slide. So as we've shared before, this series has come about due to the generous sponsorship of ASPE. In addition to the webinars, ASPE has made it possible for RTI and the NC Impact Initiative to convene a panel of national experts from academia and practitioners to identify social capital principles and emerging practices, to develop a handbook for use for community-based practitioners, and links to relevant portions of the handbook will be made available in the chat box, and we'll also send those to you as resources on Monday. And I just want to, if I do nothing else, encourage you to visit aspe.hhs.gov/social-capital. That's the website that has all sorts of resources about building and leveraging social capital that I think you will find really, really useful. And finally, please remember that the recording of this webinar will be posted at rti.org and ncimpact.org on Monday, along with all of our prior webinars. I've seen lots in the chat box. Didn't get to go to the original, to the first two webinars, want to be able to get the information. All will be provided to you. You'll receive this link from us on Monday, as well as your certificate of completion and links to lots of other relevant resources. And I am really looking forward to having you join us for our final training on September 15. Carrie, folks from Roca, Anisha, Damian, Ron, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. To all of you who weighed in the chat box, thank you for your thoughts and time. This has just been a really great Tuesday afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you on the 15th. Take care.